What drives a young man born into a life of privilege and comfort to forsake all the ease and security of the world, to embrace a life of radical service? In the ancient city of Nola, a short distance from Naples, this question finds its answer in the life of a man named Felix, a name that means happy. His story teaches us that true happiness isn't found in earthly treasures, but in total surrender to the King of Kings, to God Himself. Chapter 1, Son of a Soldier, Soldier of Christ. Felix was born in the 3rd century, the son of Hermias, a Syrian soldier who had served with honor in the imperial armies. After years of military service, Hermias retired to Nola in the Campania region, where he made his home and started a family. The blood of a warrior ran through the veins of his sons, but while his brother chose to follow in their father's footsteps in the Roman legions, Felix felt a different calling from a young age. His heart burned with the desire to serve a greater emperor than any earthly Caesar, Jesus Christ, the Lord of Lords. The upbringing Felix received within a Christian family profoundly shaped his soul. In those difficult times for the church, when faith often had to be practiced in secret, Christian families worked hard to pass on to their children not only the truths of the gospel, but also the courage necessary to defend them. Hermias, though he had served the empire, understood that there was a loyalty superior to any earthly oath. This conviction took root in Felix's heart like a seed that would bear abundant fruit. Young Felix grew up observing the life of the Christian community in Nola. He saw how the faithful gathered to celebrate the sacred mysteries, how they shared their possessions with those in need, how they supported one another amidst hardships. This practical charity, this concrete love, manifested in deeds, captivated his spirit. It wasn't enough to simply believe in Christ. It was necessary to live like Christ, giving one's life for one's brothers and sisters. This understanding would transform his entire existence. The city of Nola, with its narrow streets and stone houses, witnessed the spiritual growth of this exceptional young man. While others his age were occupied with business or seeking advancement in Roman society, Felix devoted his best energies to deepening his knowledge of Christian doctrine and practicing the evangelical virtues. His father, seeing this, recognized in him not the soldier he might have dreamed of, but something much greater, a true soldier of Christ, willing to fight the good fight of faith with the weapons of prayer, penance, and charity. Chapter 2, The Call to the Priesthood. When Hermias closed his eyes for the last time, Felix found himself at a decisive crossroads. His paternal inheritance assured him a comfortable life, free from material worries. However, the words of the Lord resonated in his heart with crystal clarity. If you want to be perfect, go, sell your possessions and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come, follow me. There was no ambiguity in this command, no room for compromise or half measures. With a determination that astonished many, Felix proceeded to distribute most of his inheritance among the poor of Nola. This was not an impulsive or thoughtless gesture, but the mature fruit of a profound conversion. Each coin he gave away, each property he relinquished, represented one more step towards true freedom. The beggars, the widows, the orphans, all those who lived in the shadows of Roman society, received with tears of gratitude what for Felix meant much more than material goods. It was the opportunity to shed every weight, to run lightly towards Christ. His friends and acquaintances tried to dissuade him. How could a sensible man give up his security like that? What would become of him in old age, without property or income? But Felix had discovered a truth that the world does not understand. Whoever leaves everything for Christ gains everything. Divine providence does not abandon those who trust fully in it. True treasure is not kept in wooden chests or iron coffers, but in the heart of God, freed from the bonds of wealth. Felix dedicated himself completely to the service of the church. The Bishop of Nola in those days was a venerable old man named Maximus, a man of renowned holiness and wisdom. This experienced pastor recognized in young Felix the exceptional qualities that make a true minister of the altar: purity of heart, apostolic zeal, knowledge of the sacred scriptures, and above all, a genuine charity towards his brothers and sisters under his spiritual direction. Felix prepared to receive the sacrament of holy orders. The priestly ordination of Felix was a moment of profound joy for the entire Christian community of Nola. That young man who had renounced the glories of the world now received the most sublime dignity: to be another Christ, to hold in his hands the power to make present the redemptive sacrifice, to forgive sins, to feed souls with the bread of eternal life. From the first day of his ministry, Father Felix distinguished himself by his clear and orthodox preaching, by his intense life of prayer, by his total availability to serve the faithful. He was a priest after God's own heart, and his example edified all who knew him. Chapter 3. Bishop Maximus and the Tempest of Persecution. The year was 249 when Emperor Decius ascended the throne of Rome. With him came one of the most systematic and cruel persecutions the Church had ever known. Unlike previous persecutions, which had been local or sporadic, Decius's persecution was intended to be total and definitive. His goal was not only to punish Christians, but to force them to apostatize, to publicly renounce Christ and offer sacrifices to the pagan gods. The entire empire became a spiritual battlefield. News of what was happening in other cities reached Nola like dark omens. In Rome, in Antioch, in Alexandria, Christians were arrested, tortured, executed. Magistrates received strict orders not to show mercy. Every citizen had to appear before the authorities and demonstrate their loyalty to the empire by sacrificing to the gods. Those who refused were considered enemies of the state and treated as such. Terror spread like a plague, but something extraordinary also manifested itself: the unwavering courage of countless martyrs. Bishop Maximus was aware that the storm would soon reach Nola. An old and wise man, he had shepherded his flock with paternal love for years, guiding his sheep along the paths of the gospel. Now, in the twilight of his life, he faced the hardest trial. He knew that the persecutors would first target the leaders of the Christian community, the bishops and priests, to decapitate the mystical body of Christ. The decision he had to make wasn't easy, but the very words of the Lord showed him the way. When they persecute you in one town, flee to another. One night, as shadows blanketed the narrow streets and stone houses of Nola, Bishop Maximus bid farewell to his community. He wasn't fleeing out of cowardice, but out of pastoral prudence. His untimely death would leave the flock without a shepherd at the moment of greatest danger. Taking refuge in the nearby mountains, he could weather the storm and return when it subsided to continue his ministry. But before leaving, he entrusted something precious to Father Felix: the direct care of the faithful. Upon the young priest's shoulders now rested the responsibility of keeping the faith alive in those times of tribulation. Felix accepted this mission with full awareness of what it entailed. Staying in Nola while the bishop hid meant exposing himself directly to persecution. He would be the visible face of the church, the immediate target of the executioners, but he didn't hesitate for an instant. His response was that of a true shepherd, willing to lay down his life for his sheep. In the following days, as imperial emissaries arrived in the city with their lists and their threats, Felix continued to exercise his ministry with courage. He celebrated the sacred mysteries in private homes, visited the sick, strengthened the weak, preparing everyone for the spiritual battle that was coming. His presence was a beacon of hope in the midst of growing darkness. Chapter 4. Chains and torments for Christ. It wasn't long before the emperor's soldiers knocked on the door where Felix was. Nola was a small town where everyone knew each other, and it was impossible to hide a priest for long who continued to openly practice his ministry. There was no shortage of informants. There are always those who, out of fear or convenience, are willing to betray their brothers. When the guards burst into the house, they found Felix calm, serene, as if he had been waiting for them. He didn't try to flee or hide. His hour had come, and he received it with the peace of one who knows he is in God's hands. They dragged him through the streets to the tribunal of the local magistrate. There, before the curious gaze of some and the compassionate gaze of others, he was presented with the usual alternatives: sacrifice to the gods or face the consequences. The magistrate, perhaps hoping that a young man from a good family would give in easily, spoke to him in an almost paternal tone. He reminded him of his lineage, the glories of his father Hermias, the future he could still have. A symbolic gesture was enough, a little incense on the pagan altar, and he could return to his normal life. But Felix responded with words that resonated in the room like thunder. "I am a Christian, and I adore Christ alone. There is no name under heaven by which we can be saved, but the name of Jesus." The sentence was immediate. Since he refused to obey the imperial decrees, he would be imprisoned and tortured until he changed his mind or died. They led him to a particularly cruel dungeon, where the floor was covered with sharp fragments of tiles and broken shells. There they threw him, chained hand and foot, onto that bed of pain. Every movement opened new wounds in his flesh. The darkness was total, the humidity penetrating, the cold intense. It was a place designed to break the strongest will, to make the prisoner yearn for death or apostasy as the only possible escape. For days that seemed eternal, Felix remained in that torment. The guards visited him periodically to ask if he was willing to give in. Each refusal was punished with new blows, with deprivation of water and food. His body, young and until then healthy, was becoming an open sore. But something extraordinary was happening in his soul. While the flesh weakened, the spirit strengthened. In the darkness of that dungeon, Felix experienced a luminous presence. Christ himself seemed to accompany him, reminding him that these momentary sufferings were nothing compared to the eternal glory that awaited him. The Christians of Nola, who couldn't visit or comfort him directly, gathered in secret to pray for his liberation. The mothers told their children about the courage of Father Felix. The elders remembered his homilies. The poor wept for the one who had loved them so much. Everyone felt that in that dungeon, not only a man was suffering, but Christ himself in his member, and their prayers, united with those of the entire church, ascended before the throne of God like fragrant incense. The Lord, who never abandons his own, was about to manifest his power in an astonishing way. Chapter 5. The Angelic Liberation. One night, when the darkness of the dungeon seemed denser than ever, and the silence was only interrupted by the distant groans of other prisoners, something extraordinary happened. Felix, in a state between wakefulness and sleep, suddenly perceived a light that began to illuminate his cell. It wasn't the flickering light of a torch or the faint glow of a lamp, but something completely different. A pure, celestial luminosity that didn't harm the eyes, but comforted them. And in the midst of that clarity appeared a figure of indescribable majesty, an angel of the Lord. The heavenly messenger approached Felix with steps that made no sound. His face reflected a peace that surpasses all understanding, and his voice, when he spoke, resonated in the prisoner's heart more strongly than in his ears. "Felix, rise and follow me." These weren't words of suggestion, but of divine command. The angel extended his luminous hand and touched the chains that imprisoned the saint. Immediately, as if they were wax before the fire, the shackles melted and fell to the ground with a metallic noise that, miraculously, didn't alert any guards. Felix stood up, staggering at first from the weakness of his martyred body, but feeling a supernatural force flow through his limbs. The angel walked towards the door of the dungeon, and it opened by itself before his presence. As if the locks and bars were non-existent, they continued to advance through dark corridors, passing guards who seemed to be in a deep sleep, going through doors that opened by themselves. It was as if all creation obeyed the envoy of the Most High, facilitating the passage of God's servant to freedom. Finally, they arrived at the outskirts of the prison. The fresh night air struck Felix's face, and for the first time in many days, he could breathe deeply. He looked back at the building that had been his place of torment, and he fully understood the magnitude of the miracle. The same God who had sent an angel to free Peter from Herod's chains had now worked in his favor. But the angel's mission wasn't over. With a silent gesture, the heavenly messenger indicated a direction: the mountains where Bishop Maximus was hiding. The road was long and dangerous, especially for someone in Felix's physical condition. But guided by the angel, he advanced with a firm step through hidden paths, avoiding the main roads where soldiers patrolled. The hours of the night passed like minutes, and when dawn began to tinge the sky with rosy hues, Felix found himself at the foot of a rugged mountain. The angel pointed upwards, towards a cave barely visible among the rocks. There, exhausted and sick, lay Bishop Maximus, unknowingly awaiting the arrival of his liberator. The angelic mission was accomplished, and with the same discretion with which he had appeared, the envoy of heaven vanished, leaving Felix alone, but strengthened for the task that awaited him. Chapter 6. The Search for the Ailing Shepherd. Felix ascended the rocky slope, feeling how each step required a superhuman effort. His body, weakened by the days of captivity and torture, protested with every movement. The wounds on his feet and legs, barely beginning to heal, reopened with the friction of the stones. But his heart burned with a concern that surpassed any physical pain: to find his bishop and shepherd. The angel's words had been clear, and Felix knew that he had not been freed for his own salvation, but to fulfill a mission of charity. When he finally reached the entrance of the cave, the sight he found broke his heart. Maximus lay on the stone floor, barely covered with rags. His face, once venerable and full of life, appeared emaciated from hunger and disease. His sunken eyes could barely open, and his breathing was labored and broken. The elderly bishop had endured weeks of exposure to the elements, without adequate food, without the care that his advanced age required. He was on the verge of death, and it seemed that only the strength of his faith was keeping him alive. Felix knelt beside him, and in a soft voice spoke his name. Maximus's eyes opened with difficulty, and in them shone first disbelief, then recognition, finally, joy. "Felix, is that truly you, my son?" His voice was barely a hoarse whisper. The young priest took the old man's cold hands in his own and replied with tears in his eyes, "Yes, my father. The Lord has sent his angel to free me and lead me to you. Now I have come to care for you and return you to our flock." But first, it was necessary to restore the bishop's strength. Felix explored the surroundings of the cave and found a wild vine with some bunches of ripe grapes. He carefully picked them and, squeezing them, gave Maximus the sweet, nutritious juice to drink, drop by drop, with infinite patience. He fed the sick man as a mother would feed her child. For hours he remained like this, watching over his shepherd, cleaning his wounds, praying for his recovery. It was charity in its purest expression, the disciple serving the master, the young man supporting the old, the newly freed caring for the one who had sent him to prison for love of the flock. Gradually, Maximus began to regain some strength. The food, although scarce, and above all Felix's presence, had a revitalizing effect on his spirit. Both talked at length about what had happened, the persecution in Nola, Felix's arrest, his miraculous liberation. Maximus listened with amazement and gratitude, recognizing in these events the provident hand of God, and both understood that they had to make a crucial decision: remain hidden until the persecution passed, or return to Nola to be with their community in their moment of greatest need. In their hearts as shepherds, the answer was evident, even if it implied the greatest of risks. Chapter 7. The Weaving Spider and Divine Providence. The descent from the mountain was slow and painful. Felix had to carry much of the weight of Bishop Maximus on his shoulders, whose strength barely allowed him to walk. Each step was a prayer, each rest an opportunity to renew trust in providence. Both knew that returning to Nola was to expose themselves to martyrdom, but they also knew that a shepherd does not abandon his sheep when the wolves attack. Their duty called them back, and they responded with total generosity. Arriving near the city, as evening fell, they found temporary refuge in an abandoned house on the outskirts. It was an old building, with cracked walls and a partially collapsed roof that no one had inhabited for years. There they decided to hide temporarily, while they assessed the situation in Nola. Felix settled Bishop Maximus in the most protected corner and cautiously went out to find some food and get information about the state of the persecution in the city. While Felix was away on his mission, something extraordinary happened in the abandoned house. A small spider, of those that abound in uninhabited places, began to spin its web right at the entrance of the refuge. But it wasn't an ordinary web. With a speed impossible in nature, the tiny arachnid worked tirelessly, extending its threads from one side to the other of the doorframe. In a matter of minutes, what would normally take hours or days was complete. A dense, perfect cobweb, covering the entire entrance as if it had been there for a long time. When the Roman soldiers arrived in the area, systematically searching any place where fugitive Christians could hide, they approached the abandoned house. The commanding officer pointed towards the entrance and ordered his men to inspect the interior. But as they approached, one of the soldiers observed the thick cobweb covering the door. "No one has entered here in months," he commented to his companions. "Look how sealed it is with these cobwebs. It would be impossible to enter without breaking them." The officer nodded, convinced by this apparently irrefutable evidence, and ordered the search to continue elsewhere. When Felix returned and saw the cobweb, he immediately understood what had happened. With tears of gratitude in his eyes, he carefully entered from the side, without breaking the protective tissue, and related the miracle to Maximus. The elderly bishop, deeply moved, recalled the words of the psalmist. He sent forth his word and healed them. He delivered them from their destructions. God, who counts the hairs on our heads, who feeds the birds of the sky and clothes the lilies of the field, had used the smallest of his creatures to protect his servants. In that humble insect, in that fragile silk weaving, the unlimited power of he who cares for his own with infinite providence was manifested. Both saints remained in prayer for hours, praising the Lord who works miracles in unexpected ways. Chapter 8. The Return to Nola. The days that followed were marked by careful concealment. From their refuge in the abandoned house, Felix and Maximus maintained discreet contact with some trusted Christians who brought them news and provisions. The information was mixed. The persecution continued, but with less intensity than in the first weeks. Some Christians had apostatized under torture. Others had fled to safer regions, but a steadfast core remained in Nola, meeting in secret to celebrate the sacred mysteries and to support one another in faith. Bishop Maximus, though his health gradually improved thanks to Felix's care, remained a fragile old man. His body bore the marks of the deprivation suffered in the mountains, and it was evident that he would never fully recover his former vigor. However, his spirit remained unbreakable. From his hiding place, He pastorally directed his community through messages conveyed by the most courageous of the faithful. His words of encouragement, his spiritual wisdom, his example of strength in adversity were a balm for the troubled souls of his flock. Finally, the moment arrived when both considered it safe to make a more visible return to the life of the community. The news that Bishop Maximus was alive and back, accompanied by Father Felix, miraculously freed, spread like wildfire among the Christians of Nola. The joy was immense. Many had feared that both had perished. Seeing the bishop alive, though weakened, and Felix standing, with the marks of torment still visible on his body, but with his spirit stronger than ever, was a powerful confirmation to the community that God does not abandon his church. The clandestine meetings were filled with new hope. Felix resumed his priestly ministry with renewed fervor. His experience in prison, his angelic liberation, his selfless service to Bishop Maximus, all this had transformed him. He was no longer simply a young priest full of good intentions, but a confessor of the faith, hardened in suffering, a living witness to the power of God. When he preached about trust in providence, he spoke from personal experience. When he exhorted courage in the face of persecution, his words had the weight of one who had been in the dungeon and had emerged victorious. Maximus, for his part, continued to exercise his episcopal ministry with the wisdom of one who has looked closely at death and has understood what really matters. His presence was an anchor of stability for the community under his direction, and with the active collaboration of Felix, the Church of Nola not only survived the storm of persecution, but came out strengthened from it. The bonds of charity between the faithful had been strengthened, the faith had been purified in the crucible of suffering, and the testimony of their pastors had left an indelible mark. They had learned that the church is not sustained by human strength, but by the power of God, and that the gates of hell will not prevail against it. Chapter 9. Humility rejects the bishopric years past, and the church experienced alternating periods of persecution and relative peace. Emperor Decius died in battle, and although his successor Valerian also unleashed a cruel persecution between the years 256 and 257, calmer times finally came for the Christians of Nola. In this context of recovered calm, the venerable Bishop Maximus felt that his time on earth was drawing to a close. His body, weakened by the trials suffered, no longer responded as before, and his soul longed for the definitive encounter with the Lord whom he had served faithfully. Aware of his approaching mortality, Maximus began to prepare the community for his departure. He summoned the most prominent presbyters and deacons to deliberate on who should succeed him in the episcopal see. In the heart of everyone, a name resonated with special force: Felix. Who better than him to guide the flock? He had proven his worth during the persecution. He had been miraculously freed by an angel. He had cared for the bishop himself with heroic selflessness, and for years he had exercised his priestly ministry with exemplary holiness. The choice seemed obvious, almost providential. When Bishop Maximus breathed his last breath, surrounded by his faithful and entrusting his soul to the Creator, sadness mingled with gratitude for having known such a holy pastor. After the burial, during which Felix celebrated the rites with tears that flowed both from the pain of loss and from the love for who had been his spiritual father, the community gathered to elect the new bishop. The unanimity was astonishing. Everyone wanted Felix as their pastor. Voices of young and old, of men and women, of rich and poor, rose proclaiming the same name. It was the voice of the people of God, the clear manifestation of the divine will. But then, something completely unexpected happened. Felix, with absolute serenity, but also with unwavering firmness, rejected the episcopal dignity. His reasons left everyone astonished by their spiritual depth. First, He argued that he did not consider himself worthy of such a sublime ministry. Humility was not in him a rhetorical pose, but a profound conviction. He saw himself as a useless servant who had barely fulfilled his duty. Second, and more importantly, he pointed to another priest named Quentin, who was only 7 days older in priestly ordination than him. "It is not fair," said Felix, "that a younger priest presides over an older one. Our brother Quentin deserves this honor more than I." The community was disconcerted. Some tried to convince him to reconsider his decision, arguing that priestly age was less important than personal virtues and demonstrated charisms. But Felix remained firm. His rejection was not obstinacy, but genuine humility mingled with a deep respect for the ecclesiastical order. Finally, at his insistence, Quentin was elected and consecrated as Bishop of Nola, and Felix, who could easily have occupied the episcopal chair, continued to serve humbly as a presbyter, with the same dedication and love that had always characterized his ministry. His act of renunciation was perhaps his most eloquent testimony of true Christian greatness, the greatness of one who seeks to serve and not be served. Chapter 10. Tilling the earth, sowing the gospel. After declining the bishopric, Felix withdrew to live in conditions of extreme poverty. The small inheritance he had retained from his father's estate had been confiscated by the authorities during the persecutions, under the accusation of being an enemy of the state. Some wealthy Christian families from Nola suggested that he legally reclaim his properties. Now that times were more favorable, and Roman law offered mechanisms to recover unjustly confiscated goods. But Felix categorically rejected this possibility with words that revealed the depth of his detachment. "In poverty, I will more surely find Christ." Without properties or income, the holy priest leased a small plot of land on the outskirts of Nola. It was barely 3 acres of stony, unproductive land, but for Felix, it represented everything he needed. An honest means to earn a living without being a burden to anyone. With his own hands, those consecrated hands that had so often raised the holy host, he dug the earth, sowed the seeds, pulled the weeds, harvested the crops. The work was hard, especially for someone of his age, and with a body marked by past torments. But he did it with joy, seeing in it a way to unite himself with Christ, who sweated blood in Gethsemane. His dwelling was a humble shack, with no more comforts than were absolutely essential. He slept on a straw mattress, covering himself with a worn blanket. His diet was frugal: a little bread, some vegetables from his garden, occasionally a little cheese or fish that the faithful gave him as gifts. During the cold winters of Campania, when the icy wind penetrated the cracks in his dwelling, Felix shivered from the cold, wrapped in his poor garments. But he never complained. On the contrary, he thanked God for allowing him to experience some of what Christ had suffered for us, he who had nowhere to lay his head. However, the material poverty of Felix contrasted dramatically with his spiritual wealth. He continued to exercise his priestly ministry with a zeal that edified the entire community. He celebrated Holy Mass with such intense devotion that those present felt transported to Calvary. His preaching was simple but profoundly evangelical, touching hearts in such a way that it moved even the most hardened to conversion. He visited the sick in their homes, consoled the afflicted, advised those who sought spiritual direction, and everything he received as an offering for his pastoral services, he immediately distributed among the most needy. There were beggars in Nola who knew the way to Felix's shack well. They knew that they would always find welcome there, even if the saint had almost nothing to give. If he owned 2 tunics, he would most certainly give the best one to the poor person who knocked on his door, keeping the most worn one for himself. More than once, he was seen exchanging his clothes for the rags of a beggar, considering that the needy person had more right to decent clothing than he himself. The poor called him Father, The children ran to meet him. The sick sought his blessing. In his voluntary poverty, in his limitless generosity, Felix radiated the authentic joy of the gospel, demonstrating that true wealth does not consist in what one possesses, but in what one gives. Chapter 11. The testimony that endures through the ages. Felix lived to a very advanced age, prolonging his days in that humble existence of prayer, work, and service. Finally, laden with years and merits, he gave his soul to the Creator on January 14th of the year 260, approximately. His death was peaceful, surrounded by the faithful who loved him and who had been edified by his example for decades. He was buried in the Christian cemetery of Nola, in a simple tomb as his life had been, but which would soon become a place of pilgrimage and a source of innumerable graces. The decades and then the centuries passed, but the memory of Felix did not fade. On the contrary, his reputation for holiness spread throughout the region of Campania and beyond. Miracles obtained through his intercession were recounted, the sick recovering their health, people being delivered from dangers, extraordinary conversions. His tomb became a beloved shrine for the Christian people. Farmers invoked him as protector of their flocks. Sailors asked for his intercession for safe voyages. Those with eye ailments came to him seeking healing. Pope St. Damasus himself, who governed the church in the second half of the 4th century, composed devout verses in honor of Felix, thanking him for a healing obtained through his intercession. But it would be in the 4th century that the figure of Felix would achieve a truly extraordinary projection, thanks to a remarkable man named Paul. This man, a descendant of an illustrious Roman patrician family, had been a consul and governor of Campania. Rich, cultured, admired in high society, Paul experienced a profound conversion to Christianity. Together with his wife Teresa, he distributed his immense wealth among the poor and retired to Nola to lead a life of asceticism and prayer. The main reason for his choice of Nola was his devotion to Saint Felix, whose tomb was located there. Paul not only built a magnificent basilica over the tomb of Felix, but also dedicated his considerable literary talent to singing the glories of the saint. Every year, on January 14th, he composed poems in honor of Felix, where he narrated his life, his virtues, the miracles worked through his intercession. Thanks to these poems, which combined literary beauty with religious fervor, we know the most precious details of the saint's life. Paul was ordained a priest and then elected Bishop of Nola, a position he held with heroic sanctity, always under the spiritual patronage of Felix, whom he considered his protector and model. Devotion to Saint Felix spread throughout the Christian world. St. Augustine of Hippo wrote about the miracles that occurred at his shrine. St. Gregory of Tours testified to the wonders worked through his intercession. The Venerable Bede included his life in his hagiographic works. In Rome, a basilica was consecrated to him. His name was inscribed in the Roman martyrology, ensuring that his memory would be preserved until the end of time. And so, the humble priest, who had rejected the episcopal mitre, who had lived in extreme poverty, cultivating a small garden, who never sought fame or human recognition, became one of the most venerated saints of Christian antiquity, proving once again that God exalts the humble and fills those who trust in him with good things. Chapter 12. The miracles of the Holy Confessor. The final years of Felix's life were spent in that same evangelical poverty that had characterized his entire priestly existence. He continued to cultivate his small plot of land, celebrating the sacred mysteries with sublime devotion, visiting the sick and those in need. His body, marked by the torments suffered during the persecution and weakened by voluntary deprivations, was slowly consumed, but his spirit remained vigorous until the end. When his time finally came, he surrendered his soul to the Creator, with the serenity of one who has faithfully fulfilled the mission entrusted to him. Felix passed away on January 14th, believed to be in the year 260, after having edified the entire Christian community of Nola with the example of a truly holy life. He was buried in the Christian cemetery of the city in a simple tomb that reflected the humility with which he had lived. The faithful who had known him mourned the loss of their spiritual father, but at the same time, they rejoiced, knowing that this holy confessor had entered eternal glory, receiving the crown that the Lord prepares for his faithful servants. The burial was a moving testament to the love that the community felt for their humble pastor. However, death did not end Felix's influence. His tomb quickly became a place of pilgrimage for Christians from Campania and neighboring regions. The faithful came there to pray, to entrust their needs to the Holy Confessor, to ask for his intercession before the throne of God. And soon, testimonies of extraordinary graces began to circulate, obtained by those who invoked Saint Felix with sincere faith. These prodigies, carefully recorded by credible witnesses, contributed to spreading his fame of holiness throughout Italy and beyond. Pope Saint Damasus, who governed the church in the second half of the 4th century, had a particular devotion to Saint Felix of Nola. It is said that the pontiff himself resorted to the saint's intercession on an occasion when he was seriously ill, and that he obtained the desired healing. As a sign of gratitude and recognition, Saint Damasus composed Latin verses in honor of Felix, celebrating his virtues and the power of his intercession. These verses, written by the hand of a holy pope and doctor of the church, constituted an official seal of approval to the veneration that already existed towards the confessor of Nola. Saint Augustine of Hippo, the great doctor of grace, also left written testimony about the miracles that occurred in the sanctuary of Saint Felix. In his treatise on the care that should be taken of the dead, Augustine specifically mentions Saint Felix and narrates prodigies of which he had direct knowledge or through reliable witnesses. The fact that a figure of the intellectual and spiritual stature of Saint Augustine devoted attention to these events is a sign of the seriousness with which the early church considered them. These were not popular superstitions, but authentic manifestations of divine power working through his saint, Saint Gregory of Tours, an ecclesiastical historian of the 6th century, dedicated entire pages to narrating the numerous miracles that were attributed to the intercession of Saint Felix. In his writings, Gregory documents cases of physical healings, liberations from dangers, and other extraordinary graces obtained by those who came with faith to the saint's tomb or invoked his name in their needs. These testimonies, coming from a bishop historian, recognized for his rigor, added greater credibility to the miraculous tradition associated with Saint Felix. Popular devotion, far from being mere credulity, was supported by serious and verifiable testimonies. The peasants of Nola and its surroundings developed a special veneration for Saint Felix, whom they invoked as protector of their livestock. In an era when families depended vitally on their animals for subsistence, any disease or plague that affected the livestock represented a catastrophe. The shepherds and farmers went to the sanctuary of Saint Felix or invoked his name in their stables and fields, asking for divine protection through his intercession. This custom, passed down from generation to generation, endured for centuries as a testament to the trust that the simple people placed in their local saint. But perhaps the most eloquent testimony about the holiness of Felix and the prodigies worked by his intercession comes from Saint Paulinus of Nola. This illustrious Roman converted to Christianity and later ordained a priest and consecrated as a bishop, came to Nola specifically because of his devotion to Saint Felix. Paulinus built a magnificent basilica over the saint's tomb and ran for years, composed annual poems, celebrating his memory and narrating the miracles that occurred in his sanctuary. In these writings, Paulinus explicitly declares that he was an eyewitness to some of these prodigies and that he never resorted to the intercession of Saint Felix without receiving comfort and help. The authority of Saint Paulinus, recognized as a father of the Church and a man of exceptional holiness and culture, confers particular weight to these testimonies. Thanks to his literary and pastoral work, the memory of Saint Felix was vividly preserved through the centuries, and his tomb in Nola became one of the most visited sanctuaries in all of Italy, a place where innumerable pilgrims came seeking and frequently finding and divine help through the intercession of the humble confessor, who in life had rejected all earthly greatness, but who in heavenly glory shines with imperishable light. Chapter 13. Prayer to Saint Felix of Nola. Glorious Saint Felix of Nola, intrepid confessor of the Christian faith, you who endured chains and torments for the love of Christ, graciously hear our supplications. In the darkest dungeons, you kept the light of hope burning, and when the Lord sent his angel to free you, you did not seek your own safety, but hastened to serve your sick bishop. Teach us, Saint of God, to always put the needs of our brothers and sisters before our own comforts, and to see in every neighbor the very face of Christ in need. Humble priest who rejected the dignity of being a bishop, preferring to serve in the shadows rather than bask in the limelight, intercede for us before the throne of the Most High, that we may come to value true Christian greatness. In a world that chases power, honors, and recognition, you show us the narrow path of authentic humility. Obtain for us the grace to never crave positions or titles, but to seek only to fulfill the divine will in the state and place where providence has set us. May we learn from you that to serve is nobler than to be served, and that the last on earth will be the first in heaven. Holy martyr of charity, you who lived in extreme poverty after distributing your inheritance among those in need, you who cultivated the land with your own consecrated hands, you who gave to the poor even the little you possessed, obtain for us a heart detached from material possessions. In this age of rampant consumerism and excessive attachment to riches, help us understand that true happiness does not consist of accumulating possessions, but in sharing what we have with evangelical generosity. When we are tempted to cling to our belongings, when selfishness threatens to harden our hearts to those in need, remind us of your example of total detachment, protector of the sick and comforter of the afflicted. You who never turned away anyone who came to you seeking help, look with mercy upon our present needs. We ask you especially for those who suffer persecution because of their Christian faith, for those who are imprisoned, tortured, or martyred for confessing the name of Jesus. Strengthen them with your intercession, that they may remain steadfast as you remained steadfast. We also pray for the priests and bishops who, like you, dedicate their lives to serving Christ's flock. Protect them from all dangers, sustain them in difficulties, and help them to exercise their ministry with the holiness and zeal that characterized your life. Saint Felix of Nola, friend of the poor and faithful servant of the Church, you who now enjoy the beatific vision in heavenly glory, do not forget those of us who still journey in this valley of tears. Obtain for us from the Lord the grace to live our faith with courage in the midst of a society that often opposes evangelical values. May we not be intimidated by mockery, criticism, or persecution, but may we confess Christ with the same fortitude with which you confessed him before the Roman magistrates. Help us to be credible witnesses of the gospel in our time, sowing the seed of the divine word in the field of the world with the patience and constancy with which you cultivated your small garden. Finally, glorious saint, We ask that when our last hour arrives, you intercede for us so that we may surrender our souls to God in peace after having fought the good fight and kept the faith. May the Lord, who freed you from earthly chains and finally led you to eternal freedom, also free us from the chains of sin and lead us, through your intercession, to the heavenly homeland where you reign with Christ in everlasting glory. Amen.